And ready when you are, sir.
So what I heard from Pastor Brewster's opening statement were many assertions. We heard about the law of cause and effect. I didn't hear justification for this. I've never heard of such a law either. What I have heard of, though, is what's called the principle of sufficient reason, the idea that effects have a cause. This inductive method is based on our experience. We have experience, we see things in the world such as ships. We've seen shipbuilders creating ships, so we infer that what exists has been built, has a creator. But I think this analogy breaks down when we look at the universe. We don't have experience of universes being created. We don't have experience of transcendent beings creating these universes. So to infer that, I think would be a great error. We also infer similar causes from similar effects. But to have an analogy from what we know on this earth is from a cause seems to be an error there, because God and the universe are not similar. They're not similar. It's a faulty analogy. Also, reasoning from parts to a whole seems problematic as what's going on. We can't look at what we know and rightly extend this to the whole. Would we look at a leaf, see how it grows, and would that teach us how a tree grows? I don't think so. But this is what Pastor Brewster is assuming when he talks about the law of cause and effect. It's interesting that he kind of bails God out by saying, well, all causes have an effect, but God is just the beginning, it's transcendent, so then God doesn't have the effect. That seems very strange to me because that law of cause and effect seems to break down. Why does God be the exception there? Why can't the universe be an exception if God is going to be an exception? Why can't we say, for all we know, the universe doesn't have a cause? Why not just be skeptical and say, we don't know, we're not at this area of human knowledge? Just because we can't know how the universe was created or how the universe is, doesn't give us good reason to assume that God did it. We may know the answer eventually, but it doesn't mean we can just put God in and say, God did it. And why the Christian God? Why one God? Why not a council of God? If we're going to use Pastor Brewster's analogy of cause and effects from what we know in the universe, what we see in the universe is that complex objects usually require a team of creators. So why not extend the analogy and say that it's a team of gods that created the universe? How can he say that one is more reasonable than another? How does he get from a creator to an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good being? After all, I have the problem of evil, the problem of suffering objection, which we'll hear from in the rebuttal, so we'll wait for that. This universe does not seem to be that which was created by a God. We also don't have multiple trials of universes being created. When we're going to have a principle such as the principle of sufficient reason or cause and effect, as Pastor Brewster was talking about, we don't have these other experiences to gauge such a principle. We don't have experience of the world at the really big and the really small, the quantum level, at the cosmological level. So I don't think it's fair to have this analogy here. Why is it that an infinite self-existing being, as he said, does not have a cause? I didn't hear an explanation for that. He says he presupposes the Bible is true, and, well, the God presented in the Bible is very harmonious with the God that he's thinking of. Well, what if I were to propose a different God that was harmonious? The fact that the explanation is harmonious is not good enough to demonstrate that this being is the creator or that this being exists. Why the Christian God? Why not a different God? Why not the council of gods? Why not an all-evil God? We can look at the evidence and see suffering in the world, so why not just infer that instead of an all-good God? Pastor Brewster said here that consciousness and logic needs an explanation. Okay, he said that the atheist position is empiricism, that atheists don't believe the immaterial is real. I don't know where he's getting that from. He won't get that from me tonight. I accept logical principles, and I don't need God to serve as an answer for these things. I can say that in order to reason, we come across these logical principles, such as the law of non-contradiction, that if I'm going to contradict myself, if I'm going to say something is on a table and off a table, then I'm clearly not making sense. So this heuristic seems to be very valuable, and it seems to be, as he said, self-evident. After we examine this principle, it doesn't fail. He was saying many other principles are self-evident, that there has to be a first cause. Why does there have to be a first cause? Why can't the universe be infinite? How do we know? Why propose God? The first cause of man and women, he said, is a personal being. How do we know that? Why can't it be a council of gods, a different God than the Christian God? He talked about absolute morality needing a God. that I don't see how he gets from we need God to explain morality to God exists. How can that happen? He needs to justify the first premise in his argument, saying that if we don't have God, we have no absolute morality. Secondly, he needs to demonstrate that there are absolute or objective moral values. We need some justification for that. An assertion isn't good enough. It's not up to me also to give an accounting for morality. It's up to Pastor Brewster to demonstrate his argument, not simply assert it. Also, when looking at the God of the Bible, we see many immoral actions where God commands genocide, God condones slavery. This hardly seems to be the being that we're going to look at as a standard for morality. There is also a famous objection in philosophy that's come to be known as the Euthyphro dilemma. Is what God commands justified because God commands it, or is something justified and moral because it is endorsed by God? If something is moral because God commands it, it seems that morality is completely arbitrary, that God could command things such as the siege of towns, he did in the Bible, and it would be justified. But that goes against everything we know about morality. Killing innocent people is not a moral act. We need to have no objective morality to come to that conclusion. If we're going to think of morality as something which is good for society, we want to understand that human life is valuable. The genocide of towns goes very much against that, as God commands in the Bible, along with many other atrocities throughout the Old Testament, and even the New, where people are sent to hell for lack of belief or blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, which is said to be unforgivable sin. He said, if laws are not revealed, morality is the invention of human will. Well, I don't see how that gets us to God, and I don't see what a problem with that is. Just because we have no lawgiver does not mean that morality has to be relative or would be relative. I would object to that, and I would need some explanation for that argument and how he comes to that conclusion. He says, without absolute morality, we are left to our vices. Okay, I don't see a problem with that. I don't see how that leads to God. Again, it doesn't mean that morality is relative if we don't have a lawgiver. This is quite the false dichotomy. He gives two options, God or relative morality, but there are more options. As he knows, there are many traditions throughout the history of philosophy, such as utilitarianism, deontology, many moral systems. Many people who are without belief in God who act just fine. So I don't see what the problem is. He says we need somebody to say something is true. I don't think we need God to undergird logic. And even if we didn't have God, we can have accountings through other means. So Reverend Brewster needs to explain how a lack of God leads us to some sort of relativism in morality, in logic, or that there would be no logic. He needs to explain that. So I also want to hear about how he knows the universe has a cause, or how the universe would have a beginning that we didn't hear. I heard a lot of suppositions here, a lot of just assertions. He says he presupposes the Bible is true. Well, presupposing something isn't going to be good enough for this debate. He needs to give a demonstration of that. He talks about the Bible being true, the Bible as a book, but many people throughout this world are going to look at their scriptures and say that their scriptures are true. And they're going to say, well, this scripture is harmonious with the creation of the universe, or the universe as we know it. So how does he distinguish the answer of the Christian from the answer of the Hindu, the Muslim, the Buddhist, whatever it happens to be? Why privilege the Christian God? Why say that that's the explanation in face of other explanations, or merely a creator who isn't much unlike a person? We can look here in the universe, and to assume that the universe, cause, origin, behaves just as we behave seems to be erroneous. There could be other beings in the universe. Why is it that we model ourselves, why is it that we model God after ourselves? That seems to be quite convenient. I need a justification for that. So we have a lot to hear, and Pastor Brewster will now take his rebuttal. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Reverend Brewster, it's time for your first rebuttal, which will be 10 minutes. And I'm ready when you are.
Well, there's quite a bit. Mr. Vacula, you give quite a lot of information, and I do my best to answer some of the questions that you have here. But I do want to point out that we're not here to argue the nature of God, but the existence of God. And a lot of what your questions have to do with is why God does what he does and for what reasons, and what reasons do we have to justify why God is who he is and why he operates the way he operates. And that's not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is, does the Christian God exist? And so I'd like to also point out that at no time did I say God and the universe are similar. What I did say was that God is the first cause of all things that exist. And as far as the law of cause and effect, I find it very difficult that you haven't heard of the law of cause and effect. That's something very elementary that we learn in school.
Right.
The law of cause and effect. And I find it very difficult that you don't understand that concept, that every effect has to have a cause. And there has to eventually be an initial first cause of all things. Everything has to have a cause except for that which is infinite, that is, that which is self-existing, which we suggest is God by our definition. You say that logical principles you do accept, and yet there's some conflicts with if you accept the immaterial, if you accept logic and reason, that an immaterial God has to use only empirical means of revealing himself to you. That is, he has to physically, give you evidence that you can touch, that you can see, but at the same time you're saying you are willing to accept immaterial. If you're willing to accept immaterial things such as reason and logic, then it should be okay to accept the idea that an immaterial God exists and that he has provided a way for us, his creation, to be able to contact him. In fact, according to the Bible, which I do presuppose is true, he says he provides an immaterial means by which we can connect to him. He says, without faith, which is immaterial, it is impossible to please God, and he that comes to God must first believe that he is. Faith is immaterial. It is something that immaterial God has given to every human being in order to enable them to reach out to him should they use the very immaterial thing that is able to touch an immaterial God. Utilitarian view suggests that consequences would drive right decisions, but we have evidence in our society today that just knowing the consequences of a wrong action does not really deter someone from doing something that is wrong. Just knowing the consequences. We see that on the news all the time. We see people stealing, murdering, doing heinous crimes, and yet they are fully aware of the consequences. So the utilitarian view just doesn't work either, because it doesn't work all the time. It's not something that is consistent. We need an absolute moral truth, something to govern ourselves by that will hold us all accountable. And if truth is relative to everyone, if I make my own laws and you make your own laws, what kind of society would we have? We would have a chaotic society. Somebody that knows what good is needs to tell us what good looks like, and someone that knows what bad is needs to tell us what bad looks like, or else I can say this is good and you can say that what I'm saying is good is not good, and we get nowhere. And so with a community or society making its own rules, we have a community of chaos. The Christian view suggests that we have an answer, that there is an immaterial God who is inherently good, who is all-knowing, who knows exactly what good is and what bad is or evil, and he has the ability to communicate this immaterially to us should we use the vehicle that he has given us to obtain that knowledge, which is faith. Why privilege? Why am I privileged to the Christian God as opposed to others? The only reason I have is because I've experienced him. And when you have experienced something for yourself, if someone has gone to the moon, you can't tell them that they haven't been to the moon. I have experienced this immaterial God, therefore I can say that He exists. I know it for myself. I have by my faith connected with this immaterial God, and that is why I am privileged to choose Him, as none of the other gods have reached out to me as He.
Keep the comments and applause, please.
I have a question. If there is, just have one last question. How does the atheist view reconcile using immaterial things like logic and reason, again, with the presupposition that God must reveal Himself through empirical means? That's really baffling to me, because in a sense you're telling an invisible God, you must make yourself visible. You must give me. If you believe, or if it's not too hard for you to believe in immaterial things, then why not say, if you are an immaterial God, then show me that vehicle which is immaterial to connect with you, rather than dictating to Him how He must connect with you.